I'd like to touch upon a couple of themes from our readings. First, kind of a smaller theme, and that is the theme of reverence that God asks from his people. And we see that especially in our first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. He speaks about keeping the Sabbath free from what is called profanation. It's not allowing profane things to invade kind of that sanctuary space of that day of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is set aside for the Lord and for his purposes, for the edification of the relationship between God and his people. And that theme, and he says, and to hold to my covenant. And that theme, of course, carries forward today into the new Sabbath that we celebrate. And it can be good for us to kind of be vigilant against various ways that and things that can invade the Sabbath that we celebrate on Sundays and can even profane it. And some of these things creep in and we don't even realize it. You know, I think of past conversations I've had with the priest as a priest with families who kids are very involved in sports leagues, for example, and they'll say, you know, we had to rush to Mass, Father, because we were at this sporting event. And on the one hand, I'm very careful to express gratitude that they're making time for that. But then I'm also going to encourage them, okay, I'd like to encourage you to bring a change of clothes for the kids so they're not attending Mass in their sports outfits, right? Now, it's better for them to be at Mass and be in their sports outfits than to not be at Mass. But to have that presence of mind of putting on semi-formal clothes, not casual clothes, when you're at Mass, because we are here to reverence the Lord. This is not a casual event that we are at. This is a more formal event, an event where we come to the sanctuary to revere and honor our God. So something to keep in mind. But again, it's that mindset that can creep in, that to treat this as just another event during the week when it's not. Another thing that often we priests contend with is talking before or after Mass. And so we're constantly encouraging people, you know, try to at least keep it at a whisper. Other people may be praying before Mass or after Mass. And we want to respect that environment of reverence for them. And it's some things we easily forget. I forgot it myself as a priest. But this passage is a nice reminder for us to kind of strive to keep that day reverent and to keep the environment reverent when we come to Mass. So just a friendly reminder on that front. Now to the larger theme that predominates from these readings, and that is how God over time, beginning with the Old Testament, yes, the first fruits of his people were the Israelites, his preferred people, but then he quickly ramps it up. He extends the invitation of salvation, of covenant relationship with him to all of the peoples. And we see that here in Isaiah. Now consider, this is written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus came. And this is what he says. He says, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. So already there we have a hint of prophecy that God will extend the call to all peoples. And thanks be to God for that, because that includes us. I don't know if we have any Jewish converts here. Probably not very many, but we are among the Gentiles. We are among the other tribes, groups of people through world history that God has called to include into his loving covenant. And so our psalm proclaims, O God, let all the nations praise you. This was a psalm already in the Old Testament. Again, important to keep in mind, written before Jesus came. Now, if we go forward to our gospel passage, it's very interesting to try to draw the lessons out from this, because from first appearance, it seems that Jesus is kind of going back on and going against the call to salvation for other peoples. As we're told, he withdraws from Jerusalem to the region of Tyre and Sidon. These were cities of ancient Phoenicia. These were cities on the coast of the Mediterranean, north of Palestine, that traditionally were associated with the land of the Canaanites. And way back in the time of the early patriarchs of the Israelites, the Canaanites were involved in all kinds of pagan religious practices and some very terrible things involving children and even babies, sacrifice of infants, some really bad things. And so they had a reputation going back very early for being a very pagan people, a people practicing things that were very far from the God of Israel. And so that reputation continued all the way up to the time of Jesus. And so his disciples would have regarded this woman as very low standing, not because she was a woman, but because she was a Canaanite, because she was from that land with those ancient traditions. So one misrepresentation of this passage is Jesus being a misogynist. Is he talking to a woman here? No. He's addressing her the way he is addressing her because of her association with the Canaanites, which were sort of seen as sort of among the worst of the pagans of the area. Now, the lesson here. Now, notice what he says to her. She's very persistent, and she believes in him that he can cure her daughter of a possession. And Jesus says something interesting. And you almost wonder whether he's being a little coy here. Because he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, that's true to an extent. He was sent to them first. And earlier in this, we're in Matthew chapter 15 here. In Matthew chapter 10, he instructs his disciples to only deal with the Jews at that juncture. But he's going to expand the circle of reaching out to further peoples beyond that with time. So she's one of these first to benefit from this. But he seems dismissive at first. The disciples, the apostles, don't want her around them. But she is persistent. And then he says something that's quite striking, that might be interpreted by some as an insult. He says, it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. What did he mean by that? Well, one of the ways to view this is, again, he's drawing a contrast between the Israelites, the children in this case, in that covenant relationship with the Father, and those who are outside of the covenant, pretty much non-Israelites. And back then, there wasn't sort of if I can put it this way, there wasn't the regard for dogs in that ancient culture that the regard for dogs that we have today. There weren't like animal humane societies back then. There were some who took dogs as pets, but dogs were largely rabid and disease-ridden animals who were in the trash dumps and who were seen as a very dirty animal. And so they were looked down upon by the society by and large of that time. And so that was kind of an insult to throw at this woman, that she would have been among sort of the unclean from a ritualistic Jewish perspective. But again, it's because she's a Canaanite. It's not because she's a woman, because as we know, Jesus treats women with great respect and embraces them into his ministry in other parts of the gospel. So it's important to keep some of that in mind. Now, above all, I think what this passage demonstrates, I like to think that Jesus was really putting her to a kind of a test of faith, which she passes with flying colors. Because I would argue that she exhibits three great traits here that really forms a model of prayer for all of us. And that's what's remarkable about this. First of all, her faith. And Jesus says it. He says it at the end because she goes along with his analogy. She said, please, Lord, even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters. She never gave up. She kept calling him Lord. This is evidence of faith. And so Jesus says, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. It's like the reward of her faith. He grants her desire. He cures her daughter from a distance. So her faith, first and foremost. But it doesn't stop there with her. It's not just her faith. It's her perseverance. She didn't quit. She kept persevering like other women we see in the gospel passage. And finally, and we must not forget this, her humility. She demonstrates great humility in her perseverance of going after what she's after and believing that the Lord can do this for her, can do this for her daughter. So, faith, perseverance, and humility, three great qualities that we can take into our prayers for our needs in our relationship with God. That's a lesson that all of us can hang on to. And thanks be to God for that, because as we know in the trials of life, any one of these three or all three can kind of feel like they're missing at times. And so let us remember the example of this Canaanite woman in persevering in prayer, in believing that the Lord Jesus can work miracles in our lives, and let us imitate her faith, her perseverance, and her humility.